Hello everyone, I'm Eternal Flame here, and oh boy, I'm just here off the cusps of the chapter leaks, because at the time I'm recording this, the actual chapter translation has not come out yet, only just the leaks, but I'm here today to talk about what I think is going to happen next, and why Kashimo versus Sukuna might be the most important fight of all of Jujutsu Kaisen that is about to happen, or at least one of the most important fights when it comes to just on a pure power scaling perspective, and most of all, the status of Sakuna and what he's going to be like entering into the other fights. However, before I even get into this and why I think Kashimo is going to make such a big impact, especially now, be sure to like and subscribe to like anime content like this. We have plenty more on the channel, and let's get into this. Oh, and obvious spoilers for chapter 236 if you've not read the leaks for it yet, or likely at the time I'm uploading it, the actual chapter translation is out, so that too, but there are going to be spoilers for that nonetheless. So chapter 236 ended with Gojo being, well, torn in half. We don't really know if he's dead or alive yet. I, like most people, including myself, are leaning closer to him being dead. I'll make an entire theory on ways he could potentially come back to life. But yeah, I'm going to save my entire opinion and thoughts for that. But we see at the end of the battle, after the editor notes get hyped up for Kashimo, calling him the Thunder God himself, Kashimo arrives. And the battle between Kashimo and Sakuna is going to start with Kashimo near immediately arriving, just somehow flash-stepping his way over from wherever they were fighting and watching, and just appearing somewhere. Like, really, I'm just thinking about how the Kashimo actually get there that fast. But that's us for another day. Now, while I do indeed have theories on what I think Kashimo's curse technique is going to be, I'm going to save that for after in the video. First, I want to directly talk about why I think Kashimo's technique is going to be so important to the actual defeat of Ryoma and Sukuna, and why Kashimo is the only one to make sense to heavily weaken Ryoma and Sukuna after this point. Now, I want you all to keep this in mind, because I feel a lot of you guys do agree with me on this. All of the students right now are just way too weak to be able to do anything at all against Sakuna. The reason that they weren't even allowed to join into this fight was because they were only allowed to join in if Gojo reached a point where he was weaker than the students as a collective. But now Sakuna effectively just taken out Gojo, and while Sakuna's not able to RCT himself anymore, and he doesn't have Madoka Deer at the current moment, when like Sakuna's RCT is on a cooldown, I want to get that out the way, he doesn't have Madoka Deer, so he can't heal himself at all right now. It will not matter for the other students because he will take them out with relative ease. And while Gojo did succeed in like making Sakuna weaker physically, making him more damaged, as well as getting rid of Mahoraga, Agito, and all the Shikigami that made up Agito, it is still not enough, and Sakuna still has way too much hidden for the students to be able to jump in right now and even have a chance without it feeling like it's complete BS. Alright, so you might be wondering now, okay Flame Man, why is Kashimo any different? After all, Kashimo was only able to take on Hikari, and sure, it might have been without his curse technique, and even if we say that he has that 5 times amp and take Gojo's statement as literal, and just say 80% of the potential of a sorcerer is in their curse technique, that's still not enough to take on Gojo, Flame Man. So why does Kashimo matter? And that is because of one thing about Kashimo that is so incredibly different from every other character, that it will make it so Kashimo's technique will not feel as out of the blue in comparison to the other characters. Now, I do think the other characters getting power-ups will not feel as out of the blue, in my opinion, but I also don't think they should be able to take on this Sakuna, especially because they showed that Sakuna was holding back, by Gojo's own admittance. However, there is one reason why I do think Kashimo is a little bit more excusable, and he will feel a little bit more justified to actually be able to take on this Sakuna, with his curse technique being Binding Vow amped. And the Binding Vow amped part is extremely, extremely important. Now, the reason why I believe the Binding Vow amp part is very, very important is because, well, I believe Binding Vows are one of the most underrated facets of Jujutsu Kaisen and its power system as a whole, because not many strong sorcerers actually use Binding Vows to make themselves stronger, because, well, they're already strong enough, and they have an entire, like, large amount of self-confidence in them. That's a huge thing to being a strong sorcerer. So most people completely, hugely underestimate Binding Vows. I've even gone into like other videos where I talked about Binding Vows, but in each of the videos I forgot about one key important example to talk about, because I always mention Nanami as my main example, but there is a much better example of how powerful Binding Vows can actually be, and why I think that it will allow Kashimo to actually push back against Sukuna. As you can tell, I very importantly mentioned most powerful sorcerers. However, there's one strong sorcerer who fully uses binding vows to its utmost and uses them the best out of every single character we have seen in the series, and that character is Mei. Mei, through sacrificing a crow's life, is able to make this random crow, a technique that caused the higher-ups to think Mei's technique would be garbage and allow her to ascend to grade 1 because of how powerful the sacrifice of her crow's life would be. And you might be wondering, okay, what do the crows do for the people who forgot? Well, a single crow, upon its life being sacrificed to explode, was able to one-shot a special grade cursed spirit that may or may not have also been amped by Kenjaku, and then immediately made it so Mei was actually worthy in Kenjaku's mind of fighting her. Now, do you want to know why this is such a huge thing? Because binding vows at the sacrifice of someone's life, because binding vows, when it comes to sacrificing someone's life, is able to make a normal bird that's not cursed energy amplified or anything like that, and it's able to amp it to the point where it can destroy a special grade cursed spirit. Now, I think some of you can already see where I'm going with this, and why this is so important. If a life-sacrificing binding vow was able to do that, imagine what a binding vow of similar cost is able to do to someone who is already on that special grade level, that level of being able to fight Hikari without his curse technique. So what you're basically doing, right, is stacking a curse technique onto someone who's already special grade level, and then you're stacking this massive binding vow amp, where binding vow amps work based on what you're sacrificing, and they amplify you based on that, and they all of that into one fighter. And now some of you guys might be wondering, okay, Kashimo's binding vow is to not use his curse technique again. How does that compare to someone sacrificing their life? In my opinion, especially for someone like Kashimo, that is probably as comparable to losing his own life. But more importantly, it's comparable enough that I actually think Kashimo getting this huge buff to actually fight against Sukuna is going to be justified. Alright, now that I got the power scaling reasons out the way of why Kashimo should be capable of doing this, because I know that's like the main issue a lot of people have, I also need to get into the narrative reasons of why I think Kashimo will be the one to heavily injure Sukuna so the students can make it even more likely, and that is purely because, as I just showed, he is the only one who can. Kashimo is the only one who has shown off the knowledge and the willingness to be able to do this, to be able to sacrifice his curse technique all in hopes of being able to fight the strongest sorcerer, i.e. currently Sukuna. So he's about to do that. And more importantly, I think Kashimo has to do this, because if Kashimo doesn't, Sukuna is going to be completely unstoppable. If Kashimo ends up just being one-shot by this point, or like taken out with relative ease, I genuinely don't see how the story continues, because Kashimo is one of the better ends of the backup plan. Sure, Yuta has whatever is going for him, but he is still weaker than current Gojo at the current moment, or else he would have hopped into the fight. Sure, Maki is strong, but they are not strong enough to do this, and they don't have a way to get strong enough to do this. Same with Hikari. Same with even Yuji, who I think Yuji is basically going to be super durable against every single one of Sukuna's attacks. Sukuna is still just a bit too strong right now. Like, while Gojo did accomplish a lot at the end of this fight, he didn't accomplish enough for the students to actually stand a chance against him, but I think Kashimo is the one who will be able to put in that finishing nail so the students can actually finally fight against Sakuna and he can be on their level to fight against. So what I end up seeing this being is Kashimo using a life-sacrificing binding vow on top of the binding vow that he is going to already have made, where he can only use his technique on the strongest to use it on Sakuna and do that final amount of necessary damage so the other students can hop in and have a chance against Sakuna. What I think is going to be a similar moment to what happened in Naruto, where Kashimo is going to use what's going to be the equivalent of the 8th gate of death and actually make an impact, because that is how strong Sakuna is at this point, to the point where everyone is comparing him to basically Madara. And well, there are only two actual ways around this, and I think people really don't want the second way of upping all the cast to make them as strong as Gojo. And the easier way would be giving this entire thing to Kashimo with this massive, massive amp all to try and finally put down Sukuna, or at least weaken him heavily enough in the process of helping the students. Of course, I don't think Kashimo is going to intend to help the students. I think he's just doing this for his own fun and desires. However, I think it's going to be an unintended side effect that he's going to get. Also, finally, Kashimo's entire story revolves around fighting the strongest and dying himself in the process, because he wants to die a battle and warrior types of death. So yeah, this will just be fulfilling that type of death, probably. However, I actually can see it being likely Kashimo ends up not dying from this, purely because of something Yaga said very, very early on, of no sorcerer dies without regrets. And Kashimo at all dying against Sukuna would allow him to die without regrets. So yeah, I think Kashimo is going to live and just not be able to fight anymore. As sad as that is. Now, some of you guys might also be wondering, okay, Eternal Flame, what is this Kashimo curse technique that you were so confident in? Well, I actually do have a video talking about this, but I'm going to go much quicker in this entire thing. So if you want to see my ideas much more in depth, I recommend watching the video in the iCard above, where I talk about what the other buff will be and that type of stuff. But I have 3 ideas for what his curse technique is going to be. Like, there's technically 4, which is his curse technique has nothing to do with his lightning at all, and if it's nothing to do with his lightning at all, well, there's no way to predict it until it actually comes, but I really doubt it, especially considering the fact they call him the Thunder God in this thing, where my 3 ideas are basically, one of them is just a giant lightning bolt, another idea is he is able to turn himself into electricity, combining basically Electro from Spider-Man with Godspeed from Hunter x Hunter, massively amplifying his speed while also making him intangible to attacks for like a short, limited period of time. And then the final technique that I have in mind for him is, of course, just general storm manipulation. Because what comes with the thunder? A storm, usually. Those are my 3 ideas, and of course these 3 ideas are not mutually exclusive either. All 3 of these could be happening, where just the giant lightning bolt is his maximum technique, where he's also able to create this massive storm that's going to encompass the entirety of like the city that they're fighting in, while he is just zooming around yeeting lightning bolts at Sakuna. And we just get this entire epic sick fight, or it's just Skege might do something else that we do not predict. However, I do think that we're going to get a massive fight in between them, which is why I really doubt it's going to be just a massive lightning bolt, if I'm being honest with you guys. And hey, who knows, he might even be able to stall for long enough to get the half of Gojo's body back to the Jujutsu High so he can live or something like that. Copium for the Gojo fans, but I also really doubt that. Anyways, yeah, this is why I have a lot of faith in Kashimo, and why I think Kashimo's curse technique will do so incredibly well against Sukuna. I, of course, don't think he is going to win. I am the biggest on the train of Yuji is going to put down Sukuna, or Yuji and Megami are going to be the ones to put down Sukuna. However, I don't think that Kashimo is going to have no impact, and he is not going to end up doing absolutely nothing, because if he ends up doing absolutely nothing, everyone is screwed, in my opinion. And there is just no way out around that, but those are just my thoughts on what I think Kashimo's curse technique is going to end up doing against Sakuna, and how much of an impact that's going to end up being. But I want to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comment section below. I'm going to see you all later. Peace.